Walters is back for another season as the official bar of the Nats Chat podcast. Walters is the best spot to go before and after home games, located at the southeast corner of Capitol and N Street, right across the street from the ballpark.
If you run a company or manage a team, hiring qualified people quickly can make or break your business. Imagine a position of need going unfilled for weeks or even months because you just can't seem to find the right candidate. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. Indeed sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates so you can reach the people you want faster. This makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Plus, there's no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts. You only pay for results on your job post. Just in the last minute that I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. Now that is fast. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. Listeners will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/BWN. Go to Indeed.com/BWN right now to support this podcast. Indeed.com/BWN. Terms and conditions apply.
2 on, 1 out. First pitch, DeJong. Swinging a line drive to left toward the line. Soto chasing. It's in for a hit. Martinez will stop at third. Soto falls down. Martinez, he throws it in from his knees, will hold at third. Soto slipped to the... Now the throw gets away. Suzuki backs it up, and a run will score.
And welcome to Nats Chat for Friday, February 21st, 2025, the day before the Nats 2025 Grapefruit League opener. Nationals versus the Houston Astros in West Palm Beach, Florida on Saturday afternoon at 1:05. Jake Irvin will be the Nats starting pitcher, along with MASNsports.com Nationals insider Mark Zuckerman, who is in West Palm Beach. I'm Al Galdi, host of the Al Galdi podcast. We, during Nats spring training, are coming to you with at least one episode per week of the Nats Chat podcast, and it is very nice to be with you. You can email us, natschatpodcast@gmail.com, including if you would like to sponsor the podcast, all kinds of ways in which you can do that. Email the man who runs the pod, Tim Shovers. That address again, natschatpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on X at Nats_chat. You can find us on Blue Sky at Nats Chat Podcast. And we have a website that we invite you to check out, natschatpodcast.com, at which you can purchase a Nats Chat Podcast t-shirt. We have multiple Nats signings from the last few days to discuss, those of shortstop/third baseman Paul DeJong and reliever Lucas Sims. We have more on the Nats ownership situation to discuss, as Nats managing principal owner Mark Lerner this week said some things that absolutely are worth examining. Examine we shall. But Mark, Tuesday was the day of the first full squad workout, the 2025 Nats spring training. Outfielder James Wood dealing with some left quadriceps tendonitis, so there is that. And Tuesday also was the day of the first Circle of Trust meeting at 2025 Nats spring training. February 2018 was when manager Davey Martinez famously had camels for a Circle of Trust meeting at spring training. Have you seen any camels in West Palm Beach so far?
No camels, no live animals yet. And that's always the qualifier, because anytime you ask Davey about the possibility, you say, well, nothing yet. There's still a whole spring to go. I think he's moved past that one, but he's always looking for metaphors of something to motivate the guys. And what is the message this year? You know, back then, 2018, it was all about it's time to get over the hump. That was the idea with the Camels, because they had reached the playoffs a bunch but couldn't win once they got there. So what's the message now? I mean, he's really preaching this idea of it's time to win. I want results. This is not just about development anymore. So I don't know. Is there a live animal that would convey that in some way? I guess we've got a few more weeks to find out.
Well, the problem is when you go camel in your very first spring training as manager, that's a high bar. And so if you're going to try to top that every spring training, you're going to run out of ammunition at some point. So I don't know, maybe he does need to abandon the animals. But, you know, it's funny. That was 7 years ago, and that still resonates. The camels, the circle of trust. Like when you hear that phrase, circle of trust meeting at Nats camp, you instantly think camels, or at least I do.
Yeah, no, and they do it every day when they're here, not the Camels part, but the circle they do for their daily meeting. And sometimes it's literally just like telling them, hey, here's what we're going to work on today. But sometimes there is some more fun to it and a little, some hijinks that are involved in it. And I think back on that and everybody thought, this guy's crazy. What is he doing? And yeah, maybe that year it didn't work out. But they won the World Series the next year. He's still here now entering his 8th season as manager. Think about all those years we went where nobody made it more than 2 seasons with the team, and here he is entering his 8th season. And I give him credit in that he's always finding new ways to motivate them and new messages to deliver, because it's a very different team now, obviously, than it was back then. And it's a very different team than it was a couple of years ago. And I think he's trying to adapt to that and understand what makes this particular group tick and what should their motivations be.
It's crazy, but if the Nats do have a good season, we are coming up on a decade of Davey. Like, us getting to 10 years of Davey Martinez as Nats manager becomes very much in play if, in fact, the Nats do well this season and that 2026 option for Davey gets exercised. But plenty of time to talk about that. We anticipated more moves coming for the Nats in terms of them signing players during spring training. The nature of the moves we'll get to with the ownership conversation later in the show. But a couple of transactions for the Nats in recent days. And I guess let's start with this one. Sunday morning, the Nats announcing having agreed with free agent shortstop/third baseman Paul DeJong on a 1-year contract. The contract reportedly worth $1 million. So 1 year, $1 million. And Paul DeJong may be here to be the number 1 third baseman. I'd like to get into that with you. He has played mostly shortstop in his major league career, but he last regular season played some third base for the first time in his major league regular season career. 328 and a third innings over 41 games at third base and playing for the Chicago White Sox and Kansas City Royals. And he actually did well defensively. That's not some massive sample size, but 328 and a third innings at third base, a +1 defensive run saved. Obviously, the Nats have C.J. Abrams as their number 1 shortstop, but third base is a bit of a question mark. There are options, but there isn't necessarily like a definite number 1 third baseman to begin the regular season, although I think we're all anticipating/hoping that Brady House sooner rather than later is called up to be the everyday third baseman. Paul DeJong does hit for some power from a standpoint of homers. He last regular season over his time with the White Sox and Royals hit 24 homers. Now, his slugging percentage was .427, so it's not like it's a monster power season. Only had 17 doubles, no triples, but 24 homers or 24 homers would have looked quite nice on a Nats team last season. Of course, that was starving for homers. So with Paul DeJong, would you say right now he's the favorite to be the opening day third baseman, or is it unclear?
No, I think he is. Based on reading between the lines a little bit, based on take it for what it's worth, but when you see them take the field as an infield to work on drills, and you've got like a first team out there and then like the second team standing right behind them to alternate each round, DeJong has been the guy to be out there first with the first teamers, with Abrams and Garcia and Lowe, and then you have Jose Tena behind him at third base. So I do think he's going to be maybe not the everyday guy, but I think he's going to get a lot of playing time. And the weird thing there is that you would say, well, he's right-handed and Jose Tena's left-handed. That's a nice platoon situation. The weird part of that is that DeJong has reverse splits for his career, so he actually hits righties better than lefties. So I don't think that's going to be a straight-up platoon situation. I think the experience and the defense, as you mentioned, the little bit I've seen from him in the workouts, he looks pretty smooth over there. And by all accounts, I mean, he was a good shortstop with the Cardinals defensively, and the feeling is that he can play a solid third base as well. I think he was brought in here to do 2 things for them. Hit some home runs from the right side of the plate, which is something they needed, and play solid defense at third base. And because of those 2 factors, I think that puts him above the rest of the group, at least in the short term, until they believe that the long-term solution is ready to come up.
So Paul DeJong is a guy who, like multiple other Nats acquisitions since the end of last season, has bounced around a bunch in recent years. DeJong, over the last 2 regular seasons, has played for 5 major league teams: St. Louis, Toronto, San Francisco, the Chicago White Sox, and the Royals. He, over the last 2 regular seasons, has a combined wins above replacement for Baseball Reference of just 0.4. So, I mean, I think the context here matters. But he hit some homers last season, and the defense. So I think you have to see more than just what he did last season at third base. But you allow yourself to think optimistically this time of year, right? And look, man, I know every spring training season we talk about, the Nats going to be good defensively this season, and then inevitably they are not. But you think about what this team could be defensively this season. DeJong at third base, C.J. Abrams at shortstop, Luis Garcia Jr. at second, Nathaniel Lowe at first base, an outfield of James Wood and Jacob Young and Dylan Cruz. We'll see with Keibert Ruiz. His defense is a question mark, but there would seem to be the potential for this Nats team to be significantly better defensively.
On paper, it looks like a solid defensive team, maybe even a really good defensive team. A lot of steps still to get there, but as you just outlined, there's a lot of reasons why I think they believe that can be the case. They really think that Nathaniel Lowe is going to make a big difference at first base. And, remember, the same was true of Joey Gallo last year, but he just didn't play enough because of injuries and his performance. We didn't get to see enough of that to make that much impact. Lowe is going to be out there every day, barring, any injuries that he might suffer. They think that makes a big difference. We saw the strides Luis Garcia made last year at second base. I think they believe that's legit, and he's still working on getting better. Abrams had a down year at shortstop, but he is pretty focused on trying to get back to who he was earlier than that. And more than a few people have noted that it seemed like his defensive struggles coincided with his offensive struggles the second half of the year. And it's a classic case of maybe taking your hitting woes out to the field with you. They've talked to him about you got to separate the two parts of the game. So I think look for better from him. And then, as you said, DeJong at third base, there's a feeling that he can be very smooth over there and that the move from shortstop is not a big deal for him. So I think it would make a big difference if they can just play. We're not even talking about excellent defense, just good, solid defense. It helps the pitching staff. I think it gives them a much better chance. And so they know what they've gotten to Young. They're not asking for anything more than what he's supposed to be. Again, short term, a $1 million contract, so they're not married to him, beyond more than a few months potentially. But you hope he hits some homers for you, and you hope that he plays good defense.
Well, if you can play shortstop, you should be able to play third base. In theory, shortstop is harder than third. So if you have the athleticism and the range to play short, in theory, you should be able to do third, maybe even in an easier way. And so perhaps that helps to explain why DeJong did well at third base last season. Yet C.J. Abrams defensively, we talked about this. He had such a mixed defensive profile last year. If you go by outs above average, he was horrible. If you go by defensive WAR, he actually was pretty good. So it kind of depends on what you want to look at. So you mentioned Jose Tena. He would be another option at third base. Long term, we're thinking Brady House. And I guess we'll again play the game of when will he be called up. But we kind of learned a lesson last year with James Wood and Dylan Cruz. You can think it's going to be like May or June. It may not be May or June. It may be July, August. We'll see. Ahmed Rosario has played some third base. I know you wrote on MASNsports.com, maybe looking more like outfield time for Ahmed Rosario. Is that correct?
I think he's going to be everywhere. They really look at him as a true super utility guy who can play third base. He is kind of the backup shortstop as well, has played shortstop in the big leagues. In fact, it sounds like he may be the starting shortstop on Saturday for the Grapefruit League opener, just giving C.J. Abrams a little more time before he plays. He can play second base. And he's not just one of these he's an infielder who can play the outfield. He has played center field. And Davey talked about being very comfortable with him as a center fielder. Now, I don't think that's the primary option if Jacob Young is not out there. I think Dylan Cruz would be the center fielder if Jacob Young needs a day off. But at least have a guy that you think is good enough to play center field, which means he's good enough to play the corners as well. I think you're going to see Ahmed Rosario all over the place for them. Even more versatile potentially than Ildemaro Vargas, the guy that he ostensibly is replacing.
Hey, Al Galdi here to tell you about the latest great offer from Window Nation for listeners of the Nats Chat podcast. 2025 National Spring Training is underway, and Window Nation is offering a terrific deal. Save 60% off all window styles from Window Nation and pay nothing for 2 years. Now, this offer will end on February 28th, so you want to act fast in order to schedule your free in-home consultation. Call 866-90NATION or visit windownation.com and tell Window Nation that you want the deal that you heard about from Al Galdi on the Nats Chat podcast. Again, 60% off all window styles, pay nothing for 2 years. But again, the offer does end on February 28th. So time is running out to save big on some of the best windows that you can buy. Window Nation windows are outstanding. 866-90NATION or windownation.com and tell Window Nation that you want the deal that you heard about from Al Galdi on the Nats Chat podcast. Increase the look, feel, and value of your home. Window Nation Windows. 866-90Nation or windownation.com. 60% off all window styles and pay nothing for 2 years. 866-90Nation or windownation.com. And tell Window Nation that you want the deal that you heard about from Al Galdi on the Nats Chat podcast.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader. Like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
Thomas's first career at bat against Lucas Sims. The pitch. Swinging a fly ball to right field. It's deep. Back goes Fairchild to the warning track. He has room, and he makes the catch for the out. Both runners will tag. Garrett comes in to score. Abrams over to third in the second out of the inning. A sacrifice fly in the third run batted into the game for Lane Thomas.
All right, so we had Paul DeJong coming on Sunday, and then we on Wednesday had reliever Lucas Sims being brought on board. The Nats on Wednesday morning announcing having agreed with free agent reliever Lucas Sims on a one-year contract. The contract, a one-year deal worth a reported $3 million. Lucas Sims is a guy who is coming off a down season, but Lucas Sims is a guy who can generate strikeouts. The problem is he also issues walk. He is a high strikeout, high walk reliever. And of course, the hope here would be that you can harness the strikeouts while reducing the walks. Lucas Sims, last regular season in pitching for the Cincinnati Reds and Boston Red Sox. Like I said, down season, 58 games, 49 in the third innings, ERA of 4.38, whip of 1.439, strikeouts per 9 innings, 894, walks per 9 innings of 5.47. That is quite high. He comes to the Nats with a career Major League regular season strikeouts per 9 innings of 1038. That's good, but also a career Major League regular season walks per 9 innings of 468. So, I mean, the statistical profile is not complicated. You get what you're looking at here. I know we talked to you guys. Age 31 season, so he's not necessarily like an ascending player, but we know how it is with relievers. All you have to do is get him to be good for 50, 55 innings, and you feel really good about the transaction here. So, is the needle going to be threaded here to where you keep the strikeouts, but you reduce the walks? That would be ideal.
That's the hope, of course. And he talked about a little bit of a mindset shift for himself and working out this winter and what he was doing. Let's be clear. He was good for Cincinnati in 2023 and decent for them the first half of last year. They traded him to Boston and it imploded. He was awful for them. So he said in working this winter, he kind of, in talking to some ex-coaches of his and people that he works with, stressed to him, you know what? Your stuff is good enough. He throws a breaking ball that moves a ton. He's got a mid to upper 90s fastball. As you said, he gets swings and misses. That's clear. But in order to get swings and misses, it has to look like a strike coming out of your hand. And he said, in his mind, the shift is don't try to make the perfect pitch anymore. Try to throw a strike. Chances are it's going to move because a lot of his pitches do move. And now it's on the corners, or at least starts out in the strike zone and goes away from that. And that induces the swings. And you're not just giving a hitter the ability to, the second the ball comes out of his hand, to recognize that's not anything I need to swing at. Now, you got to put that into practice. Is that something all of a sudden at age 30, 31, he's going to figure out that he hasn't done in the past? That might be too much to ask for, but just a little bit better. If he can be what he was a few years ago in Cincinnati, that can be a good addition for them in the bullpen. I think it's the key with him, it's the key with everybody else they have in the current bullpen right now. I think if they're in the proper role, they have the makings of a potentially okay bullpen. The problem, and we discussed it last week, and it's still the problem as we record this, and we'll see if it's still a problem next week, or maybe they address this. They don't have that top guy, the ninth inning guy. If you have that, Everybody else slots, I think, into an appropriate place. And Sims is not like one of your primary relievers, but like that second tier. Maybe he's part of the A bullpen, pitching the 7th inning at times. Maybe he's part of the B bullpen. Right now, it's like he's got to be a setup man for Jorge Lopez, who may be the closer. And that's where I think you fall into trouble. So I'm still waiting to see, do they make the move? Do they get somebody in here who profiles, has experience in a closing role? If they do that, I think you can ultimately say that the bullpen as a whole looks like it could be good. As it stands right now, it's still a pretty gaping hole. And my concern is that it bumps everyone else into a slot that they're maybe not really equipped for.
Well, I think the problem, too, is whoever you bring in at this point is flawed because there's a reason that he is still out there. And so even if you bring someone to be the closer or to be the top guy, that's only in theory. The guy is being brought here at this point because he was available, and he was available because he's flawed. So, if you signed, say, I don't know, like Craig Kimbrell last season imploded. So, yeah, he has closing experience, and you could say, hey, we've signed Craig Kimbrell to be our closer, but is that really your number one reliever? I feel like we're not going to know who the top relievers are until we get multiple weeks into the regular season and we see who's doing well. And, the hope would be that like a Jose A. Ferrer takes off and like that's a guy who you can look at as a top reliever as the season goes on. But obviously there's just a lack of experience with Ferrer, although he, of course, has this stuff. With Lucas Sims, there's also this. His strikeouts are declining. And I think that that's an important point to note here. 2019 through 2021 regular season, strikeouts per 9 innings, 1299. That's outstanding. Last 3 regular season, strikeouts per 9 innings, 969. So the Ks are coming down and the walks do remain high. So that is something to look at. I think a guy like Lucas Sims, though, this is what you do with bullpens, right? You sign guys on the cheap. You sign guys coming off down seasons, but guys with upside. And Sims does have upside. So I think this is a perfectly reasonable signing. And, Mike Rizzo last season did cobble together a bullpen that actually ended up being halfway decent. So I feel like there is maybe a little more trust to have here in that he did it last offseason and hopefully he could do it again. But there's no doubt. You look at this bullpen on paper, nobody feels great about it right now. Jorge Lopez, God bless him, he has not done well these last few years. Like, if that's your closer, you're in trouble. He has not had success these last few seasons. He's bounced around a bunch in recent seasons. And it's interesting to me that the name Kyle Finnegan does keep coming up. And when that name came up between you guys and Mike Rizzo last week, Rizzo didn't give you like a get out of here. It was more like, well, it takes 2 to tango, that sort of thing. But the Nats off shockingly non-tendering Finnegan this past November. He remains a free agent. Look, I would think he's ticked off at the Nats for non-tendering him, and I understand that sentiment if, in fact, it's in effect. But at some point, you want to work, right? You want to continue your career. Do you think that as each day goes by and Finnegan doesn't sign, the likelihood of the Nats bringing him back goes up? Or do you still feel like that's probably not going to happen?
No, I do think there's a possibility of it. You're him, as you said, like you want a job. You're not ready to retire, certainly at this point. And I completely understand what he must be feeling right now, which is I was an all-star last year. I had a sub-2 ERA on July 1st. I wound up with 38 saves among the league leaders, and I got non-tendered. Okay, well, when that happened, that was shocking. But all right, maybe they just didn't think I was worth that much. But somebody else out there is going to believe in me as a late inning top guy. And the rest of the market, as far as we know, has said, no, we also don't see you in that regard. Now, I don't know what he's been offered. I don't know who has made offers to him. But clearly, nobody has made him an offer yet that he and his agent think are up to the standard they believe that he's worth. Well, that's a tough pill to swallow. But at some point, if you want to be pitching in the major leagues this year and potentially give yourself a chance at finally a better free agent contract a year from now, well, you got to go somewhere. So I don't know what's left in the coffers from the national standpoint. They spent $3 million on Sims. They spent $3 million on Lopez. That wouldn't seem to be a whole lot, but we know they're kind of operating with sort of a limited budget here. So how far are they willing to go? And what do they believe Finnegan's true worth is? It just feels like a standoff. And at some point, somebody's got to give there. And my guess would be, if you're Mike Rizzo, as tough as it is to look at what the shape of the bullpen is right now, you're saying the rest of the market sees the same thing we did. And eventually Finnegan is going to bring the price down and come back and say, okay, I'm willing to come here for X amount instead. And if that happens, hey, we'd love to have you back. You can be our closer again. That's the other part of this is if he did have an offer from another team, it may not be for a guaranteed closer's role. And if his whole mindset is, well, I need to go back out, have a good season, reestablish myself, and get a better contract next year, for better or worse, the chance to record saves helps that process as opposed to being a setup guy somewhere else. So if the Nats, even if the money isn't what you want, but there is the chance to close, I think that would be a tough thing to pass up on.
Well, however you feel about Kyle Finnegan, there remains this bigger picture issue of why did they non-tender him, right? And we talked about this a lot when that decision happened. Again, however you feel about him as a reliever, whether he's worth $8-9 million per year or not, that the Nats last season did not trade him and then ended up non-tendering him is player personnel malpractice of the highest order. And so you say, did Mike Rizzo on his own decide to non-tender Kyle Finnegan, or was Mike Rizzo essentially disallowed from tendering Finnegan via having a paltry budget with which to work? And this topic is not going away. Nats ownership, the Nats' lack of significant spending this past offseason. We finally have heard from the Nats managing principal owner, Mark Lerner. We've talked about how he has not done an extended session with reporters in years. He still has not done an extended session with reporters in years. But what clearly has become his comfort zone is speaking to the Washington Post. This now is kind of what he does. April 2022 was when the Post broke the news that the Lerner family had begun exploring selling the Nats. February 2024 was when the Post broke the news that the Lerner family was no longer exploring selling the Nats. And now we on Monday had Mark Lerner speaking with Barry's Verluga, columnist for the Washington Post, and the quotes ran in a piece that came out on Tuesday. So there were two quotes in this that really jumped out to me. The first one was Mark Lerner on the Lerner family's commitment to owning the Nats. And, it's funny how things get played in the media and played up by fans. There's a portion of this quote that got run with. There's another portion of this quote that has not gotten noticed nearly as much. And I feel like the portion that has not gotten noticed nearly as much deserves as much attention as the portion that has gotten noticed. Here's the full quote, or at least the quote that I'm going by off the piece. Our commitment is to continue to go forward. A sale is not on the list of things we worry about. We're excited about the team. We worked too hard to get it, and we love what we're doing with it. And so unless something different happens along the way, we're in it for the long haul, end quote. That last part got the play. We're in it for the long haul. What did not get the play was what he said before that, the qualifier. What to me seems like an extremely significant qualifier, unless something different happens along the way. So we're in it for the long haul, unless we're not in it for the long haul, Later on this evening, I'm going to tell my wife, honey, I'm always going to love you unless something else comes up. And then maybe I won't always love you, That's kind of how I took that. And so to sit here and go with the pull quote of we're in it for the long haul, that is completely missing the context of what he said. So that stood out to me. And then the other thing from this, and this is, I think, one of these multi-layered house of cards type things, Mark Lerner on the Nats' lack of significant spending this past offseason. Quote, when Mike Rizzo calls me in and says we really need to think about it for next winter, we'll talk about it. Right now, he doesn't think. And I agree with him. There's no point in getting a superstar and paying him hundreds of billions of dollars to win 2 or 3 more games. You've got to wait until, like Jason Worth. Jason was right on the cusp of the team being really good, and it took us to the next level. That's the ideal situation. It's always on our mind, end quote. So Mark Lerner, very interestingly, putting the Nats' lack of significant spending this past offseason on Mike Rizzo and saying that Rizzo didn't think that now was an appropriate time to spend significant money, or at least that was the implication from that quote. And I wonder what Mike Rizzo thinks about that. Now, maybe what Mark Lerner said is 100% true, but boy, that seems to go against everything we have heard. And when I say heard, I don't just mean from reporting, but also from Mike Rizzo himself when he on MLB Network in December said, quote, now's not the time to hit the brakes, it's the time to hit the gas. So Lerner putting the lack of spending on Rizzo. Was Rizzo, when he read that, nodding his head, or was he banging his desk, fuming at being used as the excuse for the lack of spending? So that's what stood out to me. I know that, you're down there at spring training. You're talking to all kinds of people about this. What did you make of what Mark Lerner had to say?
Oh, there's a lot to get into with just those couple of quotes, as you pointed out, because there is so much that you can parse from it. First of all, I'm just going to say, I don't want to get into whatever your relationship with your wife is. I just know I would never say that to my wife and expect to be allowed to sleep in the bed that night. We'll just leave it at that. So, look, Mark Lerner has been here pretty much all week as a presence, daily presence at camp. I actually chatted with him, had a very nice chat with him, about 10 minutes with him, coincidentally the day before Barry interviewed him. Now, good on Barry for getting him to agree to go on the record and let him ask him some pointed questions there. You know, my conversation was very much just friendly chat. And, you know, I raised a couple of subjects pertaining to the team, but I wasn't trying to portray it in any way as if I was trying to put him on the spot and get him to say something that I could then use as a quote. But what I will say, not just from that conversation with him, but from other people around the team and just the general sense all around, I think the truth lies somewhere in between what we're discussing here. I think that the front office, Mike Rizzo, did believe that there was an opportunity to spend more this winter and to go into the free agent market more than they had in quite a while. And that maybe he was told, well, we don't really have the budget for that right now. That's not something we're looking to do. But I also think there's some validity to the idea, and you've even heard Rizzo suggest this in a couple of things that he said, that they didn't want to go for the big move, the 9-figure contract, the top free agents, both because of whatever impact they thought that guy might make on their team this year or not, but also, and you heard Rizzo say this, not wanting to lose a draft pick because it's attached to the qualifying offer for these top free agents, not wanting to lose international money that you sometimes lose when you sign top free agents, and a feeling of that while they are getting closer, that this is maybe not yet the go for it year that they hope that it might be. So I think the answer is somewhere in between the two. I think, look, you tell Mike Rizzo, hey, you have an unlimited budget, go do whatever you want. Yeah, he would have gone and signed Corbin Burns and Anthony Santander and Pete Alonso, whatever else he could do. But I think even from a smart baseball standpoint, he would also concede that he wanted to make moves of more significance than he has, but maybe not lock himself up with those gargantuan kind of deals that we have seen with this franchise have not always worked out and have hamstrung them down the road. So I think it's a middle ground there where the truth actually is, but clearly this had not all been articulated well to the fan base or to us. I don't think we really feel like we know what the plan was this winter or what the larger grand plan is. You can say, hey, okay, we're going to talk about it next year when we think we're more ready. That doesn't mean they're going to do it for sure until they finally dive into that free agent pool again and make a significant move. We can't just assume that's going to happen again.
No, and, the notion that this year is the year to take a step forward, as Davey Martinez has been saying, that seemingly is contradicted by the offseason behavior and by what you just said when you say, well, it's not really the go for it year. Like, it kind of is. Okay, so what is this exactly? Is this the go for it, step forward, bust out of the rebuild season? Or are we still in rebuild mode? We thought that we were exiting rebuild mode. It sounds like the team still is in rebuild mode. When the Nats entered the rebuild in 2021, there was all kinds of talk of, okay, 2022 can be like 2010, and then 2023 can be like 2011, and yada, yada, yada. And there was this thing of like, the timeline is expedited this time. It turns out the timeline maybe isn't expedited this time. Not the way the team is behaving, and certainly not from some of the results that we're seeing from a one-loss standpoint. So I think that does stand out that, this notion that this season was going to be different. Maybe it will be, hopefully it will be, but the offseason behavior certainly was not in accordance with that. Another thing I'd say is this. There's a middle ground between doing what the Nats did this past offseason and signing Juan Soto, okay? The Nats signed Michael Soroka 1 year, $9 million. I'm just going to throw this name out there. I'm not saying specifically the Nats should have gone after him. Detroit signed Jack Flaherty for 2 years, $35 million. Like, the Nats could have done something like that instead of getting a guy, Michael Soroka, who got demoted from the starting rotation of the worst team in baseball last season in the Chicago White Sox. And I hope Soroka is great for the Nats this coming season, but if you have doubts, you have reason to have doubts. You mentioned Pete Alonso. Again, I'm not saying necessarily the Nats should have signed him. His market cratered. Pete Alonso got humbled in free agency. It was the Mets, And I don't know who else was in on Pete Alonso. His free agency lasted for so much longer than most people anticipated. He ended up signing a 2-year, $54 million contract with the Mets. You know, if the Nats wanted Alonso and wanted those homers, you would think that maybe they could have gotten him. Now, it takes the two to tango. Maybe some of these guys didn't want to come to the Nats, so you have to be open to that. Everything you outlined makes sense with the draft pick stuff. I understand that. I think that is a worthy path to go down if, in fact, you want to go down that path. But, you look at this offseason and it is underwhelming. And when we talk about the Nats wanted to add power, what they did to add power was sign Josh Bell and Paul DeJong and trade for Nathaniel Lowe. But the Lowe thing wasn't so much about the power. It's, the defense is a big part of that too. This is what you did to add power. A spring training signing of Paul DeJong and signing a guy in Josh Bell who's coming off multiple down seasons. It's disappointing. It's tough to take. And it's hard to think that Mike Rizzo didn't have bigger aspirations. And to that end, there also has been this in recent days, and it comes to us from our friend Tom Lavero, columnist for the Washington Times. And look, let's just be blunt about this. Tom has a very good relationship with Mike Rizzo. I'm not saying that this came from Rizzo, but I wouldn't be stunned if it did or came from someone close to Rizzo. Tom, in a column that came out February 12th, reported the following regarding a guy who the Nats were tied to this past offseason, free agent first baseman Christian Walker, who ended up signing with the Houston Astros, 3 years, $60 million. Quote, Washington was in on Walker, according to sources, and their talks with the free agent had progressed well, but when it came time to put up the money, those resources weren't there. End quote. So essentially what Tom is saying is the Nats were in on Walker, wanted Walker. Rizzo needed the money for Walker, but wasn't given the money from ownership for Walker. That would seem to contradict what Mark Lerner said to Barry's Verluga.
So I don't know the exact specific of this one, except to say I know they liked Walker a lot. That was kind of more than Alonso. That was the name that they looked at going into the offseason as, hey, here's a guy who hits 30 homers and plays Gold Glove defense at first base and a good solid veteran who could be had at not a 9-figure price, but in that mid-range that you're talking about. And he ends up going, 3 for $60 to the Astros. So I do know that they liked him a lot. I don't know what actual offer they made him or if there was a formal offer to him. But I think what you have to point out with this one, and this applies to a lot of other stuff as well, and you said earlier it takes two to tango. I think this is a legitimate point that has to be brought up with all of this stuff. Right now, if you're the Washington Nationals and you're trying to get a free agent to come to you, you're facing an uphill battle compared to other teams that you may be in the bidding with. So the Houston Astros, while not quite the same team they were a few years ago, are still a team that has had a lot of success in recent years and has some World Series aspirations. And so it's an easier sell to a top free agent like Christian Walker to go there than it is in Washington. And it goes back all the way to the Jason Worth signing. At that time, DC was not a place that you're going to get big names to come to. How did they get him to come here? They sold him on the vision, yes, of, hey, this team is getting close to being ready to win. But they also overpaid him and gave him a 7-year deal when most people figured there was no chance he was going to get more than 5. And that was the hook that finally got him here. So I think you have to acknowledge that if you do want to get back in that game again, and you want to do it before your team has started winning again, you're going to have to offer more than anybody else to sweeten that deal and make them turn down better teams to come here instead. That's a tough challenge. And we'll see if they have a better year this year and they're, in the 80s instead of in the 70s. Maybe it's an easier sell and you don't have to do that so much next year. The last point I want to make, I've been guilty as what you've talked about of trying to say, well, this year is like insert year from the past. They're now in 2010 territory. They're now in 2011 territory, whatever that is. And I think a lot of people felt like, okay, this is 2011 where they should be now. And that's the year that they won 80 games, but they signed Worth leading into that. Well, if now wasn't the time to go sign a big guy like that, they won 71 games last year. In 2010, they won 69 games. This is the comparable year to that. They didn't wait to sign Worth until they were ready to win the division, until they were already a 500 team. They did it the year before that. And so I think that's what's disappointing to a lot of people is if you really are going to try to follow that path that you took before, that tried and true method that Rizzo has done and shown could work, this was the year to start getting back into that, not to wait until you're on the cusp of contention, but to do it the year prior to that.
MLB insider Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic, in a piece that came out a couple of Sundays ago, so this was on Super Bowl Sunday, in fact, February 9th, wrote about payrolls in MLB. Per Fangraphs, the Nats, as of that day, had one of the more significant payroll declines from last season to this season, a 15% decline, tied with the San Francisco Giants for the sixth highest decline in terms of percentage last season to this season. Now, yes, some of this has to do with Steven Strasburg off the books, Patrick Corbin off the books. I get that. But we talked about that. Hey, that money's coming off the books. In theory, there's some money available to be spent. The money has not been spent. Now, we always say this. I think it's important to say this. Spending does not mean winning. You cannot spend a lot and still do quite well. And sometimes not spending ends up working out for the best. The Nats, in not signing Christian Walker, made this trade for Nathaniel Lowe. Maybe we end up looking back on that as a fortuitous break in circumstance, kind of like the Brandon Phillips, Daniel Murphy thing of years ago, to where you're best off with what you wanted to happen having not happened. But I'm not comfortable with your head of baseball operations for a decade and a half, who you trust and you love so much, being handcuffed, if in fact that's the case. You have your head of baseball ops. In theory, he should be allowed to do what he sees as best for the organization, within reason, of course. And Mike Rizzo's going to behave within reason. Mike Rizzo is not reckless in free agency. We know that. It's a problem if he's not being allowed to do as he sees fit. And again, I say if, because there's information here we don't know. But man, there is reason to have a lot of question. And I don't know how, if you're a Nats fan, you feel great about this stuff right now. I don't see, if you're paying attention to everything and just thinking logically, I think it's hard not to buy into at least some of this, that ownership isn't spending like ownership has spent in the past and like Mike Rizzo would like for ownership to be spending.
That was the selling point all along for the sell-off in 2021 and then in 2022. Hey, we're going to go through some rough years. We're not going to be spending the kind of money we used to. We've got to build this thing up again from scratch. But once we've got that foundation built again, once the next core of young stars is here, we're going to return to being the kind of franchise that we were for almost a decade when they were in contention, had a winning record every year. They have not reached that point yet, even though I think a lot of us look at this and say, that young core is here now. Wood is here, Cruz is here, Abrams is here, Garcia is here, Gore, Irvin. There's potentially House coming this year. There's more on the way. This feels like a team that's ready to take the next step, but it needs some help to get there. It's hard to ask all the young guys to make that leap that they're trying to make. And unfortunately, that's where they are, is that they are asking for the young guys to lead the way and do this. And then if they do, if they are able to take a leap this year and get everybody excited for the possibility of next year, will then be the time? Or is this going to be a recurring theme? And now they are not operating like the Washington Nationals of the 2010s, but they're instead operating like the Pittsburgh Pirates or the Tampa Bay Rays. And I am quite certain that's not an area that most, if any, fans of this team want to be in.
James Wood, Dylan Cruz, C.J. Abrams, Luis Garcia Jr., MacKenzie Gore. The onus is on you guys and others. And if those guys hit, then a lot of good things will be happening. And if those guys don't hit, then there are many conversations to be had.
Hey, Nats fans. After the exciting Nats game, have a listen to some relaxing solo piano music to unwind and help you go to sleep. I'm Tim Newmark, the composer of the Nats Chat theme song, and you can find my latest music on Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, and anywhere you stream music. The song you're hearing now is called Improv in A-flat major, The End of the Road.
You found your person. Now let the Knot help you with everything else. The Knot connects you to the wedding inspo, vendors, venues, and planning tools you need to make your day totally you. Having helped plan 25 million weddings, we've got your back when it comes to every little detail like RSVPs, budgets, and more. Because your wedding comes to life with the connections that matter the most. Get started at theknot.com/audio. The Knot. Let's plan your wedding together.
Left-hander rocks, kicks, delivers the pitch, swinging a ground ball, slowly hit left side. Charging in Abrams, fields cleanly. Fires to a stretching Gallo. Good play in time, and the inning is over. So MacKenzie Gore does it again. 5 straight, 1, 2, 3 innings, 15 up and 15 down to start this game for Gore.
So the Nats' Grapefruit League season begins on Saturday afternoon. Jake Irvin will be the starting pitcher for that game. MacKenzie Gore was to be the starting pitcher for that game, has gotten pushed back. But when it comes to opening day, I know nothing's been announced, but I mean, is it safe to say Gore is going to get that assignment? He certainly would seem like the obvious choice.
I think they've kind of set it up for him to be the guy. We'll see. I think there's a case for Irvin based on what he did last year as well. But when they talk about Jake Irvin, they like what they've seen from him, of course, but they don't talk about him like the future ace of this team. When they talk about MacKenzie Gore, they talk about him as the future ace of this team. And while it may be a big assignment to ask of him at this stage of his career, I do think there is a point to saying, yes, you're our number one guy. We believe in you. Go out there and show us that that's who you're going to be. There's a lot of time for this to sort itself out. Let's see who's healthy. Let's see how they pitch this spring. But I think all things being equal, given the choice, they would probably pick MacKenzie Gore for that assignment, with probably Jake Irvin right behind him. And then you're talking about Soroka and Williams, and then one of the young lefties potentially as the 5th starter. And we went there for a long time with Max Scherzer or Steven Strasburg as your opening day starter. Then we had to suffer through the Patrick Corbin years just because kind of by default he was the guy. We thought they had turned a corner last year when Josiah Gray got the assignment. He said, okay, finally, it's one of the young guys. We're turning the page there. And unfortunately, Josiah made 2 starts, got hurt, and won't be back until at the earliest later this season. There is really this groundswell of feeling like, okay, we're ready. It's time to move on. Who is the guy going to be? And of the group that's here now, it's certainly MacKenzie Gore. There's another class that we may see next year, 2 years, 3 years down the road in Harleen Susana, Travis Sikora. They could have something to say about it. But for right now, I do think MacKenzie Gore is viewed internally as the number one starter. And it's just time for him to step up and do that and show he can do it on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I mean, this does set up to be a real breakout season for MacKenzie Gore. He last season overall was good, but he had that period of time in which he was really bad. So he kind of sandwiched 2 stints of good around 1 stint of really bad. And some of the numbers, ended up being not so pretty. High whip, pitch inefficiency, way too many pitches per innings. But overall, he ended up having a good season. This season does set up. Okay, he's been in the majors for a few years now. Knock on wood, the Nats have done an excellent job of keeping him healthy. The rotation is his to anchor. I mean, Josiah Gray is not coming back until at least, second half of the season, if he's back this season at all. This sets up to me for Gore to have a season like Gray had 2 seasons ago when Gray was an all-star. Like, have that sort of bust out, here I am kind of season, maybe even at a higher level than Gray had, because I think most would say Gore has higher upside. But we know with starting pitchers, it could take a few years. So if this isn't the bust-out season for Gore, I don't think you panic. But I think this does kind of set up to be, hey, this could be MacKenzie Gore time this season. He's accumulated some experience. He's dealt with some trials and tribulations, ups and downs. Now you'd love to see him put it together and have that first truly great season that we all feel like he's capable of.
Well, he was that guy for the first half of the season. I mean, he was pitching at an elite all-star level. And if you look at where he was I'm looking at June 20th here. So that's 15 starts in. He's got a 3.26 ERA and 98 strikeouts in 80 innings pitched. So he was that guy. He tailed off a little bit. They had the really bad stretch in late July and August. But what he did to finish out the year, and I think this is why this is so important, that he did show he could figure out what he was doing wrong, flip that switch, and pitch like a dominant number one starter. His final 7 starts, 1.55 ERA, 45 strikeouts to only 11 walks in 40 2/3 innings. And that got his ERA. His ERA got as high as 4.66 at the low point, and he got it back down to 3.90 in the end, which is not easy to do that late in the season. So I know you have to consider the entire season as a whole, but you're talking 15 starts at the beginning and 7 starts at the end, where the ERA is like easily in the 2s with way more strikeouts and innings pitched. That's a number one starter. He has that in him. It's just a matter of reducing those slumps not letting starts blow up on him. If he does have a bad one, coming right back the next time and being good and not being so hard on himself, which I think is one of his biggest weaknesses. So he knows it. They know it. They've worked on it. But there really is a feeling that he can take that next step and be the guy. And there's a reason that he was one of the key parts of the Soto trade. He was a top 5 pick in the draft of the Padres. He is supposed to be an ace, and I think everybody's waiting to see now if he can become that guy this year.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've thought about, I'm sure a lot of people have thought about, who from the Juan Soto, Josh Bell package will prove to be the best player. And you could make a case for MacKenzie Gore. Like, maybe it's James Wood, maybe it's CJ Abrams, but it could end up being MacKenzie Gore. We'll see. Should be a healthy competition.
Maybe it could be Harleen Susana before it's all over. We got a ways to go till we know that. But as a guy who's been in big league camp and turning heads just with his physique and his ability to throw 100 plus, it is somebody to watch. And don't forget that he was a big part of that trade as well.
He was. It will not be Luke Voigt. At least I don't think so.
No.
I guess things could always change, but I think it's probably safe to say that. A lot to be thinking about right now if you're a Nats fan. Hit us up on X at Nats_chat. Hit us up on Blue Sky at Nats Chat Podcast. You can always email the show to natschatpodcast@gmail.com. We, for this season, again, are offering shout-outs on the Nats Chat Podcast. If you want to send a hello or a congratulations or a happy birthday or whatever to someone who listens to this podcast, we'll gladly do that for you. Email Tim Shovers, natschatpodcast@gmail.com. All Nationals radio highlights on Nats Chat are courtesy of 106.7 The Fan. Like we said earlier, we're coming to you with at least an episode per week during National Spring Training, so we'll be back with you next week. For Mark Zuckerman, I'm Al Galdi. We thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on the Nats Chat Podcast.
Did I not clearly explain the circle of trust to you, Greg?
Yeah, I think I got it.
Then is there something you want to tell me?
I don't think so.
Didn't we have a discussion yesterday in the car about this?
Oh, yes. You mean me and Pam. Yes, I would love to talk to you about that.
We're not talking about Pam, Greg. We're talking about you.